When Mr. Cooper was asking you questions, right?
Yeah.
He asked you, did you see Hakeem Robinson make a phone call to Raekwon Howard while you guys were in the parking lot?
Correct.
And you said yes, right?
Right.
Everyone's talking about how Kay so disrespected the judge and got him heated in that Jacksonville courtroom, but what really went down was way more devastating than any courtroom drama. While people were focused on the disruptions and family drama, the real story was unfolding with testimony so shocking it left the entire courtroom speechless. What you're about to hear is how a father's words sealed his own son's fate in one of the most heartbreaking murder trials Jacksonville has ever seen. Chapter 1: The Father Who Destroyed His Son's Life. The moment Abdul Robinson Sr. took that oath, everyone in the courtroom knew they were about to witness something unprecedented in Jacksonville criminal history. Here was a father who had been charged as an accessory to murder, facing his own potential prison sentence, but had made a deal with prosecutors that would save him from serious time. The cost of that deal? Identifying his own son as a killer. Robinson Sr. was arrested in 2020 for allegedly helping Whitaker and Barner escape after the shooting. In exchange for his testimony, K-So's dad will face a maximum of 20 years in prison instead of a potential maximum of 60 years at his sentencing. This wasn't some absent father or estranged parent looking to hurt his child. Abdul Robinson Sr., also known as Blue, was involved in his son's life and had his own complex relationship with the streets that led to these charges. But facing the possibility of spending years in prison himself, he made a decision that would haunt both him and his son forever. The prosecution had been building their case against K-So, real name Hakeem Robinson, for months after the 2020 shooting death of 23-year-old Charles Lil Buck McCormick Jr. They had dash cam footage that captured the shooting, they had social media evidence, and they had witness statements. But they needed someone who could definitively identify the hooded figure in that grainy video as Hakeem Robinson. The silence in that courtroom was deafening when Abdul Robinson Sr. identified his own son as the person who killed Charles McCormick Jr. Court observers who witnessed this testimony say the authenticity of his pain made the identification even more credible to the jury. You could see him struggling with every word, knowing that he was essentially signing his son's life sentence. The defense team knew they had to attack the credibility of this devastating testimony if they had any hope of saving their client. They brought up his criminal history, his own charges in this case, and the plea agreement that gave him every incentive to cooperate with prosecutors. They painted him as a desperate man who would say anything to avoid prison time, even if it meant destroying his own son's life. But the prosecution was ready for this attack. They reminded the jury that identifying your own child as a killer isn't something any parent would do lightly, regardless of what deal they might have with prosecutors. The emotional authenticity of his testimony proved he wasn't just telling prosecutors what they wanted to hear. He was telling the painful truth about what he saw in that video. Abdul Robinson Sr. testified that he picked up Whitaker and Dominique Barner from a woman's house the day McCormick Jr. was killed, and later helped dispose of evidence including clothes worn during the shooting. When the prosecutor asked Robinson Sr. who most wanted to go after McCormick because of the diss song, the 54-year-old said his son's Hakeem Robinson. This testimony revealed the depth of family involvement in covering up the murder and showed why prosecutors had leverage to secure his cooperation. The admission that he helped dispose of evidence after the shooting demonstrated that Abdul Robinson Sr. wasn't just a witness to events. He was an active participant in the cover-up. This made his decision to testify against his son even more significant, as he was admitting to his own criminal behavior while implicating Hakeem in the actual murder. What made this testimony so powerful was how it connected the dots between the shooting itself and the aftermath. The prosecution could now show a complete picture of premeditation, execution, and cover-up that involved multiple family members working together to hide evidence of the crime. Chapter 2: What Got Him Caught Up. While the father's testimony grabbed headlines, the prosecution's secret weapon was cutting-edge forensic technology that turned grainy dash cam footage into scientific evidence. This wasn't your typical blurry bodega camera footage where you're squinting trying to figure out if that's your homeboy or some random. This was scientific analysis that could measure everything from how somebody walks to the exact proportions of their body. The technological breakthrough represented a whole new level of police work using methods that were previously reserved for big-budget federal cases. cases against major crime families. The process, which prosecutors called a digital fingerprint extracted from video evidence, involved taking the dash cam footage and running it through sophisticated computer programs that could pull measurements and movement patterns from the masked figure. During 6 days off, testimony, law enforcement, DNA experts provided scientific evidence that supported the witness accounts of the murder. The physical evidence created an unbreakable chain linking the defendants to the crime scene and the actual shooting of Charles McCormick Jr. The DNA analysis revealed traces of the defendant's genetic material in the vehicle used during the shooting, while gunshot residue testing showed that they had recently fired weapons. This scientific evidence eliminated any possibility that the defendants were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. What made this evidence so potentially explosive was that it addressed what had always been the biggest challenge in prosecuting crimes where the shooter is masked up. In the past, prosecutors would have to rely on snitches, circumstantial evidence, and basic video analysis that often left plenty of room for a good defense attorney to create reasonable doubt. Queso's defense team wasn't backing down without a fight. They mounted a serious challenge to this high-tech evidence, arguing that it was nothing more than expensive guesswork dressed up to look like real science. The defense's whole strategy centered on a simple question that any hood dude could understand. Can fancy computer technology overcome what multiple people saw with their own eyes? Multiple independent witnesses, including trained police officers, described the shooter as being between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 11 inches with a slim build, while Queso stands well over 6 feet tall with a heavy build that would be hard to mistake even in baggy clothes. The defense hammered home these stark physical differences, pointing out that witness descriptions of the killer didn't match their client's actual appearance. But prosecutors had more than just video analysis. The state called its final witness as the lead investigator detailed how he identified Hakeem Queso Robinson, Abdul Robinson Jr., Leroy Whitaker, and Dominique Butta Barner as the suspects in the case. They had pieced together a comprehensive timeline using multiple surveillance cameras that tracked the suspects' movements before and after the murder. The video evidence went way beyond just the moment when the shooting went down. Prosecutors showed footage tracking the suspect's path from the victim's apartment complex all the way to the scene of the crime and then through their chaotic escape that ended in a high-speed chase and crash. This comprehensive video timeline, they argued, provided undeniable proof that this wasn't some spontaneous beef that got out of hand. This was a carefully planned hit. Chapter 3. When street loyalty crumbles under pressure. The courtroom was packed tighter than a trap house during a raid when the prosecution's star witness stepped to the stand. Dominique Butta Barner, the 31-year-old former getaway driver, had made the decision that every street dude fears most. He flipped on his own crew in exchange for a deal that could see him walking free in his 40s instead of dying behind bars. What made Barner's testimony so explosive wasn't just the detailed account he gave about the murder itself, but the intimate knowledge he dropped about the planning, the relationships between all the players, and the cold-blooded calculation that went into what prosecutors described as a premeditated execution, exposing secrets that only someone deeply embedded in Queso's circle could have known, and laying bare motives the defense struggled to counter. Standing just 5 feet 7 inches tall with distinctive tattoos marking his birth year, Barner might not have looked like much, but his words carried the weight of potentially sending his former homeboys to the grave. The prosecution painted Barner as someone who had been raised in the belly of the beast, growing up in Jacksonville's most violent neighborhoods and becoming tight with the Robinson family and their whole crew from childhood. His testimony revealed a close-knit circle of young street soldiers bound by blood, loyalty, and their involvement in the ATK organization, which prosecutors argued wasn't just some rap group trying to blow up. It was a full-fledged criminal enterprise. But it was Barner's step-by-step breakdown of how they planned the hit that really had the courtroom shook. He testified about using the Duval County Clerk's website to locate Lil Buck's address, finding out through a traffic citation that McCormick had been pulled over, which revealed his home address and vehicle information. The level of preparation was mind-blowing. The testimony painted a disturbing picture of modern street warfare where public records, websites, and social media stalking had replaced old-school methods of finding targets. Barner broke down how he had been monitoring Lil Buck's Instagram account for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to catch him slipping. When McCormick posted a photo from his apartment complex in December 2019, Barner immediately peeped the location and hit up his co-conspirators. The morning of January 15, 2020, Barner testified, started in the early hours when he discovered through Instagram that Lil Buck had returned from Las Vegas. The phone call to Abdul Robinson Jr. at 4 a.m. set everything in motion, demonstrating just how quickly the street machine could mobilize once their target was back in town and vulnerable, showing the level of surveillance, urgency, and coordination that defined their movements, and how a single piece of information online could spark a deadly chain of events. What made Barner's testimony particularly damaging was his detailed description of the arsenal they brought and the specific roles each player was assigned. He testified that he was strapped with a Glock 23 handgun, Leroy Whitaker was carrying an M&P 15 rifle, and K-So was armed with what he described as an AR pistol, connecting the defendant's public image directly to the alleged murder weapon. However, the defense wasted no time going hard at Barner's credibility during cross-examination, exposing the sweetheart deal he had cut with prosecutors. Originally facing life without parole for not one but two separate murder cases, Barner's cooperation had potentially reduced his sentence to as little as 20 years, meaning he could be back on the streets by his late 40s instead of dying in a cell, with decades of freedom, choices, and influence still waiting ahead of him. The cross-examination exposed the harsh reality behind Barner's cooperation. Without his testimony putting K-So at the scene as the shooter, there would be no deal. This revelation cast serious doubt over his entire account, raising questions about whether his detailed story was real memories or carefully crafted fiction designed to secure his freedom, leaving jurors torn between believing a first-hand witness or distrusting a man with every reason to manipulate the truth for personal gain. The case attracted national attention from hip-hop media personalities who recognized the significance of a father testifying against his son in a murder trial. The intersection of rap culture, family loyalty, and criminal justice created a story that resonated far beyond Jacksonville's local music scene. Hip-hop commentators noted how the case represented broader problems within drill rap culture, where musical content often reflects real street conflicts that can escalate to deadly violence. The McCormick murder was directly connected to rap lyrics that disrespected a dead family member, showing how musical beefs can turn fatal. Popular hip-hop podcasts analyzed the family dynamics that led to Abdul Robinson Sr.'s decision to testify against his son. The podcasters explored how plea agreements create impossible situations for family members who become involved in criminal activities either directly or as accessories after the fact. The discussion on these platforms reached millions of listeners who were trying to understand how a father could testify against his own child in a murder trial. The case challenged traditional notions of family loyalty and street codes about never cooperating with law enforcement. Chapter 4: Swift Justice and Explosive Aftermath. Hakeem Robinson's sister countered testimony from his father, saying that a person captured in video recording showing the deadly shooting was not her brother. Her emotional defense of her brother created dramatic courtroom moments as family members took opposing sides about his guilt or innocence. The sister's testimony highlighted the devastating impact the case had on the Robinson family, splitting them between those who believed in Hakeem's innocence and those who felt compelled to tell the truth about what they witnessed. Her description of her brother's physical characteristics directly contradicted the father's identification. The prosecution had to address this conflicting family testimony by emphasizing that the father's closer relationship with Hakeem and his involvement in the aftermath of the shooting gave him better knowledge of his son's involvement. They argued that the sister's loyalty was admirable but didn't change the facts of what happened that night. The verdict, reached after just over 3 hours of deliberation, shocked legal observers who expected much longer deliberations given the complexity of the evidence and the family testimony conflicts. The speed suggested that the jury found the prosecution's case overwhelming despite the defense's efforts to create reasonable doubt. Jacksonville rapper Hakeem K-So Robinson was found guilty Thursday of first-degree murder in the 2020 shooting death of 23-year-old Charles Lil Buck McCormick Jr. The moment the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted with emotion from both families who had waited years for this conclusion. The McCormick family finally had their answer about who killed their loved one, while the Robinson family watched their son's future disappear. The speed of the verdict indicated that despite conflicting family testimony, the jury found the father's identification credible when combined with the physical and digital evidence. The hip-hop community's reaction to the verdict was immediate and intense, with major personalities like DJ Academics providing live commentary that reached hundreds of thousands of viewers. The case became Hakeem Robinson's sister countered testimony from his father, saying that a person captured in video recording showing the deadly shooting was not her brother. She made a post on her Instagram supporting her brother, stating how people are only focused on McCormick's death. Social media exploded with reactions from fans, other artists, and commentators who couldn't believe that a father's testimony had led to his son's murder conviction. The case sparked broader discussions about family dynamics and street culture and whether Abdul Robinson Sr. had any choice given his own legal vulnerabilities. Regional hip-hop podcasts provided deeper analysis of how the case fit into broader patterns of violence within Jacksonville's rap scene. The discussion highlighted that Robinson still faces murder charges in the 2019 shooting death of Adrian Lil Bibby Gaynor Jr., meaning his legal troubles are far from over despite this conviction. The podcast analysis revealed how the case represented just one part of an ongoing cycle of violence that has claimed multiple lives within Jacksonville's music community. Post-discussions emphasized how rap lyrics and social media posts were being used as evidence in multiple criminal cases, changing how artists approach their content. During their closing arguments, prosecutors placed strong emphasis on the emotional weight behind the father's identification of K so as the shooter. They insisted that the testimony carried unique power precisely because it came from a man who, under normal circumstances, would have every reason to shield and defend his own son, yet in this moment chose instead to speak honestly, a choice that, according to prosecutors, made his words almost impossible for the jury to dismiss. The prosecution reminded the jury of Abdul Robinson Sr.'s visible struggle during his testimony and how his pain proved the genuineness of his identification. They argued that when combined with the digital evidence, physical evidence, and witness statements, the father's testimony removed any reasonable doubt about K-So's guilt. They emphasized that identifying your own child as a murderer isn't something anyone does lightly, regardless of what plea agreement they might have signed. The emotional cost of that testimony proved its authenticity in ways that legal agreements couldn't manufacture. Community leaders in Jacksonville have been grappling with the broader implications of a case where a father's testimony led to his son's murder conviction. The fact that Abdul Robinson Sr. was facing his own serious charges highlights how violence affects multiple generations within families, creating impossible situations where parents must choose between protecting their children and avoiding their own prison sentences, a cycle that exposes how crime doesn't just claim victims in the streets but tears apart households, reshaping trust, loyalty, and the meaning of survival itself. Violence prevention advocates point to this case as evidence that current approaches to addressing street conflicts aren't working effectively. When fathers are testifying against sons in murder trials, it suggests that community support systems have already failed multiple times before reaching this devastating conclusion, exposing how gaps in intervention, broken trust in institutions, and the lack of consistent mentorship can all combine to create a reality where betrayal becomes inevitable and tragedy feels almost predetermined. The truth hit different when family turns witness. Make sure to click on another box on your screen to watch another video to catch up with other rap news. Take care, y'all.